chairman of NBC Universal Television. Now, I guess I'm president, vice president, PA, whatever, of my own company, Gaspin Media. And I'm here with Ted Sarandos, who is Chief Content Officer for Netflix.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Ted and I know each other for about 10 years now, and Ted, you started at Netflix about 10 years ago, right? 11 years ago?
11 years ago, yeah. 2000.
What do you think are the biggest differences between when you started and Netflix today?
Well, the big one has been the migration from DVD through the mail to streaming. And it's the interesting one, though, has been that that's what we had set out to do way back when I first met Reed, almost 12 years ago, which was that we were going to be a digital distribution company, and we were going to build the subscription base and the delivery model and everything else through DVD through the mail. Right. With our eyes on digital. At the time, we thought of it as a downloading business, but then it was the kind of click and watch nature of streaming. That was the light bulb moment when we moved into streaming, and both from the consumer behavior and the digital delivery cost and everything just kind of came together a little over 5 years ago when we started streaming.
So 5 years ago was the real inflection point?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So in the most recent report I saw for the fourth quarter, you had about 2 billion streams.
2 billion hours.
2 billion hours of streaming,
yeah.
Which made you, someone did the calculation, not me, but it made you the 15th largest cable network, but in Netflix homes, like the second largest cable network.
Yeah, I saw that analysis. Yeah.
And do you expect at some point Netflix will be number one?
It's an interesting way we kind of measure ourselves, which is, do we get people? Can we grow engagement? The hours that you spend in a given
right.
month on you watching Netflix. And it's an interesting thing because there's increasingly most of the viewing is done on television. So it means somebody is making a choice which remote to pick up, which buttons to push to put Netflix on that television screen instead of something else. And the customer who spends a lot of time with us stays around for a long time and tells their friends about it and discovers new shows and all those things. And the customer who's super casual tends not to. So we really try to focus on increasing the engagement. So if we do our job right, we'll definitely move up on that way.
So what are some of your techniques for increasing engagement? We're all used to more traditional media and how we get viewers to come more often. What do you have to do, when you're primarily a streaming service?
So there's been a couple of changes in the business. When we were DVD through the mail only, TV programming was 15-18% of viewing, TV on DVD. On streaming, it's more than 60%, or nearly 60% of viewing is television programming. And more interestingly, though, it's the kind of 1 hour serialized dramas that people really discover, fall in love with, and get really addicted to. I mean, the stories I hear about people who spend their entire holiday weekend a few weeks ago watching Breaking Bad, watch the entire 3 years of Breaking Bad in a weekend.
Someone termed it binging.
Yeah,
which I actually
we're
like.
We're trying to find a better word for it, but binging.
But I think it's kind of interesting. Cable is always marathon content. We always got viewers in cable to watch more often by marathoning. But I never heard the term binging before, and that's really almost what it is. And what I found really interesting is my 19-year-old son is the one who first, sort of made me understand the consumer behavior.
Right.
But the other day I was talking to my 75-year-old mother. And she told me she spent the whole weekend watching, I think, Homeland on her VOD. And that's when you have a behavior that 19-year-olds do and 75-year-olds do, you're seeing something that's a longer-term trend, not something that's just, the next generation. Yeah,
and I think where we kind of differentiate ourselves in that space is the personalization. So being able to find incredible things that you just missed. These new, fresh shows are incredibly popular and incredibly valuable, of course. But like last night, most people watch the first episode of Mad Men.
Right.
So that's what's really exciting to us is that that you could bring new people to a show. In this case, that's been off the air waiting for its new season, or in other cases where it's a show that literally may have been a one season and out show that otherwise would have disappeared from the culture. So like the Fox series Terriers is doing really well on Netflix. And it's just the personalization. It's not me or some team of editors trying to put that in front of people, but it's just the developing the algorithms that helps people discover great stuff. And it's even better, it takes almost the same effort to get someone to discover a 90-minute movie as it does, 126 hours of Lost. So
your measurement is quite different, though, than the measurement that many television executives are used to. So how do you measure success? And how does that compare to success that you might see on a traditional broadcast or a cable network?
I think it's maybe one of the more interesting mistakes that premium TV made was publishing ratings, because I think ratings is a one-dimensional success. So if a lot of people watch a show, but they cancel the service the day after the show's over, I don't know how successful that show was. So I think that when you look at it and say, did this show get good ratings relative to the cost of producing it or acquiring it? Does it generate publicity and for the brand and put the brand out into the public discussion? And does it create kind of a brand halo on the rest of the content? So I think that sometimes you could do that with a very low-rated show, and it's just a matter of figuring out what the economics are. So.
All right, let's go back 6 months. Netflix is unstoppable, seemingly unstoppable. And then 2 perceived blunders, real blunders, I won't make a judgment. Quickster and the price increase happened sort of one after the other.
Yeah.
What happened?
So we made decisions that I believe were 100% consistent with the streaming video company, which was to create distance between the streaming video company and the DVD by mail business. And what I say that was 100% consistent, which is the more we grow the streaming business, the more international the service is, the more that the DVD by mail in the U.S. is an anomaly. So the effects of the technologies that you have to support it only work in the United States.
Right.
When you talk about the brand, when people hear that Netflix is coming to the UK, a big chunk of people know that Netflix is a DVD company still. So the more distance we can create from the two service, from DVD through the mail for a streaming company, we thought the better. I would say that it is our weakness and our strength is that we're willing to do big things quickly, tear the Band-Aid off and jump in. And I think in this case, it was insensitive relative to consumer expectation to surprise our subscribers and our members with change. No one really wants change. Right. Particularly, it's a brand that people really love. And what's great and challenging about the internet is when people they take ownership of the brand. They feel like it's their brand too, and it is their brand too. And we moved way too quickly, for that. And then you see the kind of power of the internet how to mobilize a public opinion, and it turned very quickly for that change.
So would you say that the consumer, I guess this is kind of the first time that I think I saw so quickly consumer behavior changing what might be your business plan, your business model.
Or certainly the timing of it,
right?
For sure.
So
yeah.
you think it's just you've got to figure out a way to get it done in a different way, slower, with more of a telegraph to the consumer.
The communication has got to be very clear. It has to be very what it's going to be. People don't want to have to wonder what it's going to be like, because in a vacuum, I think people imagine something horrible.
Right.
And in fact, I think there was nothing really that wrong with the plan. It's just that eventually the public opinion just turned on it so heavily that it was like, this is not worth trying to resell this. Yeah.
So does that mean you can't make another change right now, or you've got to delay any changes you might make that might be perceived as big, anti-consumer?
No, we just have got to make sure that the consumer has a very loud voice in the decision and in the process.
And
always.
I assume you
we
talk
always
a lot,
do, by the
right.
way.
I assume you talk a lot to your consumer now. What are you hearing? Have they passed it? Have they forgiven you?
Well, who knows? I'd say that we've announced that we've kind of gotten through the point where people were bailing on the service over the changes, and we've kind of returned to growth. And so, but it's one of those things that sticks with the brand that we just have got to keep reinforcing with our customers that we saw what we know what we did, and we're being more mindful of it in every other thing that we do, in site enhancements, in content negotiations, in everything that we do.
Do you think it's more perceived than real, or do you think it's a...
Yeah, well, I mean, the impact perceived than real? No, I think what's real is that there were, price changes are delicate.
Right.
Service changes are delicate. And I think that, the notion of 2 separate websites was, something that it freaked people out. And so I think in the way that measurably some people left the service because they didn't like the idea of change. And then some people left the service because they didn't like the idea, even if it didn't impact them. So there's a bunch of things around that, and then so you have to get through that and kind of start over and rebuild the brand and rebuild the trust. So, and then we think, in those cases where it mostly applies to the DVD by mail business, that business is going to be evolving very rapidly with no matter what we do. So there was a grand vision that we would make that change to kind of prop up the DVD business and stay more focused on the DVD business. But the truth is, the DVD business is going to see declines no matter what we do.
Right. So let's talk about that for 1 second, because Warner Brothers just announced they're going to extend the delay for DVD for Netflix from 26 days to 52 or something like that. They doubled it. I assume that will precipitate an even faster decline if you can, if other studios climb on board. And
I think what it does is it creates an uncertainty about the business that consumers are not comfortable with. If you remember back to the launch of Blu-ray and HD DVD, when you're trying to explain the difference to consumers, the first thing they do is stop buying. And I think when you start getting into confusion as to when things are going to be available on what windows, is that going to be for rental, is that going to be, I think the confusion will be a net negative, I think, for consumers, which ultimately may be a net negative for the disc business too.
Okay. Let's talk about your original strategy, because that's something that's somewhat new. You have your first original show launching next month, right?
February 6th.
So just give us a little story on your original strategy, how you picked Lilyhammer as the first one.
Okay.
You have a big bet on House of Cards, right?
Yeah, House of Cards. So the origin of the strategy itself was, our streaming business was launched primarily non-exclusive in terms of the content. That the brand was, the company and the consumer proposition was so broadly differentiated that exclusive content really wasn't going to be part of the differentiation. Over time, we think that certainly over the next few years that people will try to co-opt the benefits of our business. You're seeing it today with HBO Go and Showtime's, TV Everywhere models, all these different models, so that increasingly that exclusive content may be an increasingly important differentiator. So that was one motivation. The other motivation was the thing I said earlier about the 1 hour serialized drama. People just, it's a very addictive, piece of product that brings people incredible joy. And it's also very economically challenged on network and cable television. So producing, the 1 hour serialized drama with this very expensive writing and everything that goes into these shows, and they're also very difficult to syndicate because they are too serialized. We saw some problems like with Playboy Club and where they had to kind of deserialize the show from its original roots to try to get it to work better. And then the DVD box set, which used to really drive the economics of a lot of these shows, as you know, which is also drying up a bit. So when you look at that and say, well, broadcasters and cable operators are probably not going to be going as deep into the serialized game as we would like, so we'd have a healthy kind of season after content model the way we're in. And so one way is to say if we need to develop that muscle, because only HBO, Showtime, and Starz are going to be producing those shows, and they don't want to sell to us, then maybe that's a muscle we should develop on our own.
So what do you think the business model for original content premiering on Netflix is? Because if HBO or Showtime or any of the broadcaster or cable networks now have you as the secondary window.
Right. What's
the secondary window for a Netflix original, or do you have to pay for both?
Well, we'll find out. Right now, the HBO, Showtime, and Starz, they don't necessarily want to sell their stuff in the season after window.
Right.
In a perfect world, we would do nothing but license their stuff in a season after or 2 season after model. I think it's a much better use of our cash and a much bigger benefit to those guys to make their content more efficient.
Right.
But they have a different strategy. They want to go exclusive, and that's fine. So if there's right now in our first wave of content, we don't own the shows. So we're doing it in conjunction with the production companies that retain different sets of rights. So, but can sell in syndication kind of in the traditional models, and certainly on DVD and all the other ways.
We have no idea because it never happened before. But
right.
Do you think a show that premieres and gets all its attention drawn through Netflix will have a secondary window? Because we know there was secondary windows for broadcast, very successful. Cable was difficult till Netflix came along. There wasn't a lot of not a lot of syndication success for cable series, scripted, not a lot of places to go, and even DVD sales were limited.
Yeah, I think in previous years you'd say that there weren't any cable-to-cable sales of off-net, and now we're starting to see some.
Happen.
So I think it'll move along that same kind of trajectory.
So how much original content do you guys think you'll have, and do you have? Is it just experimentation right now, or do you really think
it's bigger than experimentation, but it's definitely learning.
Right.
So we don't think that we're going to necessarily get it right off the bat. I look at HBO didn't have a hit show really for 8 years when they first got in. It took them that long to figure out The Wire, and then they I think they stumbled on the highly serialized cliffhanger shows too. But we're also going to distinguish ourselves differently. Like in the case of Lilyhammer, we're going to launch the entire season on one
Right.
day. So you can, if you are that person that wants to watch the whole show over a weekend, you can do it. And it also enables you to discover it way down the road. The show itself, just to set expectations, it's a bit small. It's a quirky, very interesting show, but it's partially subtitled. It's shot in Norway. We did it in conjunction with Norwegian television.
Right.
So the Norwegian cast is speaking some English and Norwegian, and Stevie the star is speaking English. So it's partially subtitled in that way. But it's a very good show that works for its core audience. What's coming down the road, as you mentioned, House of Cards as well. We'll deliver late 12 or early 13. This is David Fincher directing the pilot, and a phenomenal cast. Kevin Spacey in his first television project, Robin Penn Wright starring in it, Bo Willimon, who's is the head writer of the show and one of the producers of the show, and he just nominated for an Oscar today for Ides of March. And so that show will be coming. We've got Arrested Development is out there that we'll...
Fantastic. We're thrilled that you're doing that.
Thank you. So it'll have an original and exclusive 4th season of Arrested Development, which will be coming roughly the same time, early 13. And then we have 2 other pretty ambitious shows that are still that are in the works. So by mid-13, we should have 5 very high-profile shows, original shows on Netflix.
And do you expect to launch them all the same way you're launching Lilyhammer, which is all at once, or you'll wait and see?
We're going to test it a little bit. We're going to use it to figure out what's the best way to engage with the consumers on it. So
I would think
maybe different flavors, always multiple.
Yeah.
I don't see us doing a every week episode.
Right. I would think though that if you did it every week or more often than once,
right,
you bring the consumer back to Netflix week after week, and then maybe they sample more product, and you just get that engaged consumer that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, what you have to figure out is it the thing is it more frustrating than it's exciting, and then finding the right balance between that. Like I find the new fall season to be incredibly frustrating if I love a new show, because I don't want to wait till next week to watch the next one.
Oh, but twice a week or just more often, or 2 at a time, but stretching it out to it'll be. I think we'll all be very interested to see how that plays out, because it's. It certainly matches what we talked about earlier, the binging consumer behavior that we're seeing.
Well, we had a great discussion with the talent, with Lilyhammer. They were not, Stevie Van Zandt was like, well, we wrote the show for 6 months, and then we shoot the thing for a year, and then you're going to put it all up, and he's like, and you're just going to be up in one day, and then it's all out there.
It's like holiday dinner. You cook it all day long, and you eat it in 10 minutes. And
but I told him, I go, that's exactly how he's in the E Street Band. I go, that's exactly how you release an album. I go, in some cases, you spend your whole life writing that album, and then you put it all out and let the consumer take it. So I think if people want to watch it one a week, they can. If you want to watch it all in one weekend, you can. I think that it's core to the Netflix proposition with our customers is choice. So I think more choice is better, and by putting it out in bulk in that way, I think we give the choice.
It's so counter to what traditional media executives have done for all these years. So I think we're going to be very interested to see how it plays out. That's
been interesting too. Every show that we've added, when we add full season, we are the complete inverse of the networks.
Right.
So in the networks, even if a show's pretty successful, every week they lose viewers, and the audience is smaller every week throughout. And with Netflix, every week the audience for any given show grows. So by the end after we've had it for a month, we have more people into the show, and they're coming in through the first episode.
Do you have any evidence yet whether viewers that come and watch a series on Netflix that's still in production on a network, that the network sees some lift from that?
So there's some of it's anecdotal, but I think that I think in every case for an on-air show, Netflix has been net positive for the broadcast network that's airing the show, or the cable channel that's airing the show. The few of them that people would attribute would be like Sons of Anarchy, that had a very successful 3rd season launch after the first 2 were very successful on Netflix. Walking Dead, I think, is one that had built a great audience, from the first season, where people discovered that show kind of slowly. And I think it's really, really beneficial for the more serialized the show is, the more likely it's going to be beneficial. Mad Men is an example where I would say that far more people have seen the first episodes of Mad Men on Netflix than ever saw them on AMC, which has built a great audience. And all this.
So it'll be interesting to see when the next season of Mad Men comes out. If they see a big lift from.
Absolutely.
Good. All right. So let's talk about Netflix's relationship with Hollywood. A few years ago, Hollywood didn't know whether to fear Netflix, whether to thank Netflix. Where do you stand now? What do you think the relationship is now?
I think it's just normalized. We're a buyer. We're a big buyer.
You're one of the biggest buyers here, if not the biggest buyer at NATPE, right?
I imagine we are. And I think it's in that way that we get kind of integrated into the strategy. And even in our original production, business, Fox is producing Arrested Development, so we're just a customer in that space. So there's a bunch of conflict always because most of the studios own distribution and content, which causes a bunch of conflict in decision making, and no one knew exactly were we good for one team and bad for the other, or vice versa. And really, what we have to do is say, well, you really don't have to figure that out because we are net positive to the economics of your programming, and if it all works well, we're net positive to your broadcast networks too.
So now Hollywood looks at you a little bit like the golden goose. Do you worry that they're going to just, when they need to hit certain quarterly numbers, that they're just going to use Netflix as an opportunity to try to push pricing and bring more money in the tent? And how does that affect your model, and what do you do about that? Generally,
positively, because of access. So, if there's quarterly pressure from suppliers, it has been, the net result has been, some new nuance to access. So it's not that the notion of we want to protect this, we want to protect that, a lot of that's great in theory. But at the end of the day, you produce content to monetize it, and we're a way to monetize it. So typically, it's been net positive to us more than it's been, we're going to jam Netflix with X, Y, and Z. We have, long-term deals with the pretty defined puts, and the way that the shows flow to us are fairly predictable.
So tell us a little bit about what happened with the Starz deal, right? There was a lot of talk before Starz renewal and how they were going to gouge you, and they were going to really, there's the press reporting, not me saying that, but. And then you didn't make the deal. So what happened?
Well, we were at the table for a long time, and we would have liked to have renewed that deal with Starz, and I think they would have liked to have renewed it with us. But that's one of those conflicts that we just talked about, of whether the revenue from Netflix was going to be net positive in light of the fact that they would create conflict with their carriage agreements, and therefore the economics of the deal had to be so big that they would have to compensate for things that we had no benefit from. So we already had kind of warped incentives and baked into the deal. I think what's interesting about it is, everyone always contemplated that deal was going to come up for renewal. We would have to have it. We would pay anything for it, and it would crush our margins. So, renewing Starz was critical. And then when it came down to it, I think it's very typical of a programming decision, which is if you have a really expensive show or a really expensive group of shows to produce or license, and relative to that fee, no one's watching them. I don't mean nobody. I mean the ratings are not high enough relative to that fee. Then the shows get canceled, and that's a very business as usual story for almost everyone in this room. And that's really what happened. Right. It was single digit viewing, and the requirement to renew the deal would have been way disproportionate, which means it would have created an immense opportunity cost, and it would have been hugely negative for our subscribers, because all that premium dollars that would have been poured into that relative to viewing would have meant we couldn't close other deals that people were watching in much greater numbers. Right. So right on the heels of that deal, we closed this exclusive deals with AMC and the CW for content that is being watched in much bigger numbers than Starz is currently. And and so really when you look at it and say, how do you describe what happens when the Starz content? And it's just really the Sony content went away almost a year ago. And so it was down to basically the Disney output and a bunch of catalog movies. And it's all good stuff. We'd love to have it, no question. But at the end of the day, is how much can you pay for just what is single-digit viewing like that? Yeah.
All right. Let's talk a few general questions, and then we'll open it for some questions to the audience. In 5 years or in 10 years, are people going to watch linear television?
That's a great question. I think it's a generational thing, and I think what's really been amazing in the fourth quarter, we streamed 2 billion hours of content. And in that time period, linear TV viewing actually went up a little bit. People aren't turning off the TV and only watching. So it's incredible, I think, how expansive the entertainment universe can be. If you really do it in a way that consumers can, develop a relationship with content and their delivery suppliers and all those things. So when I look at that and say, well, people are going to just turn things off, I think what will happen is TV will be far more live event centric. Not Super Bowl, the Oscars, but also American Idol and X Factor and America's Got Talent, and that's happening all over the world. I mean, the most popular shows are these kind of results-oriented competition shows, and that's very uniquely in linear television's wheelhouse, because there's where you have to the whole country, once you know who won, you don't want to go to work and have somebody tell you. So maybe I think that's what's propping up linear television now. And those shows seem to be getting more exciting and drawing bigger audiences all the time. So I think that will keep people tuned into linear television.
So, what happens to advertising? And is it, does it become more subscription based? You just really start seeing, I'd say 5 to 10 years from now, viewing habits just changing drastically.
Yeah. Well, the subscription should be an alternative monetization model to advertising. And so I think what's interesting, I think anytime anyone watches anything, they subconsciously, make trade-offs. So, I give the example a lot about Avatar, where going to see Avatar in 3D, on IMAX 3D was a radically different experience for people. And some people got in the car and drove really far, and they passed their local theater because they wanted to see it in IMAX and in 3D, and paid a premium for the ticket. And for everyone who did that, thousands of people are going to wait and watch it on TNT with commercials, 3 years from now, 3 years later. So people are making all those trade-offs around how urgent it is that I must see it, how much do I care about the quality of the presentation. Right. So I think that in all of these models that, there are trade-offs, which keeps us kind of, the studios and networks are able to kind of skim the market in that way, and consumers do it voluntarily. You can opt into it or opt out of it. And the subscription window right now is a way that they can, the studios and networks, and we can figure out what's the kind of right window for that product. And the more that it generates, the kind of moves up the pecking, up in the pecking order. Right. So I think there's always this great place for advertising supported content. There's another thing that my theory around it too is that, ad CPMs are more based on scarcity than anything else. And, there's only one Super Bowl, and that's why they get all these great ad rates. And I think that's going to be the challenge of ad-supported content online, is this perception of unlimited inventory. Right. So,
all right. Well, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. If you've got a few questions, there's a mic. If you could just stand by the mic, that would be great. Is there a way to get the mic turned on?
We're going to select your question out, but
you don't have to turn it on. If you talk loud, we'll repeat it.
I'll talk loud.
Okay.
There you go.
The 2 billion hours in Q4. Any numbers you can share on how that broke down? TV viewing versus movie viewing? The Q4.
Give him a third microphone. It doesn't. It's running about 60-40 TV versus movies. So, and the trend is actually rising for television.
Would anyone else like to shout out a question?
Get from the diaphragm, please.
That goes to my question, which is, besides service and price change, myself and people who sell you content have noticed a different acquisition strategy. Less in the long tail, if you will, less indie. Would you talk to that?
Yeah, I don't think
the question was just about a change in acquisition strategy, less indie and more traditional, right?
I would say that's a radical misperception. That there is the interesting thing, and what we're able to do is why on some things people say, oh, Netflix paid a lot relative to the market, or Netflix got that cheap relative to the market. And the interesting thing for us is in our acquisition strategy is we can pay an enormous amount for a show or a movie that gets watched an enormous amount of time, right? So I think that we're able to bring kind of equilibrium to the acquisition process, which doesn't really exist for anywhere else. Which is to say, we'll pay a lot for that because people are going to watch it a lot, not because it has a lot of buzz or because it won a lot of awards, just because people are going to watch a lot of it. And in the same case is that we can get further and further down the tail. Now, the DVD business enabled us to be kind of, everything published business because it's a perpetual license, and, it didn't matter. Basically, I buy a disc and I can rent it till it breaks. But in the case where you're constantly renewing licenses, you're renewing it based on what you know or what you can forecast the viewing hours to be. Now, sometimes you get the law of small numbers. You get down to a number that you and I won't agree on what the viewing is worth, and therefore we don't probably close that deal. But I'd say that in terms of long tail, the things that are being watched on Netflix in very high numbers would be things that today people characterize as very, very long tail.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Go ahead.
Where are you from?
I'm on the free trial at the moment. So.
Great.
But in all seriousness, when do you start to revisit the notion of, I know Spain is quite far down the track, and perhaps other international territories that might work?
Well, I should mention, thank you for the question. The question is, when will we revisit further expansion beyond our just launched UK and Ireland? A year ago when we were here at NATPE, we had just been in Canada for a few months, and we had not yet launched in Latin America. So we've had a lot of international change in a year. And the only way, by the way, it's possible to have had that kind of expansion in such a short amount of time has been, some efficient things like NATPE, but also I have a phenomenal team of people. A lot of them are in this room, a lot of you folks in this room do business with. Cindy Holland, who does our domestic television, Jason, Sean, Kelly Merriman, who did all the deals for UK and Ireland. So it's been able to. You can only do that if you have I think, a really incredible team of people who can just let loose in a territory and learn the territory and run. The question about when we'll keep going is mostly about what we said is we're investing very heavily in these new territories. And what we have promised is that we want to return the business to global profitability before we expand any further. So it's we've got some really large bets in Latin America and the UK and Ireland that we're only a couple weeks into in that case. So as those territories are turning profitable, we'll look to reopen further territories.
All right, thank you, Ted, so much for doing
Thank you.
this. Thank you. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you.
Cindy's right there.